Okay, I have found some more interesting applications to the opening few verses of the Book of Mormon that are just too good to lose. And I've been thumbing through the analysis of textual variants of the Book of Mormon, Royal Skousen's impeccable research on through the manuscripts of the Book of Mormon, and a lot of the changes are simple, like in the 1 Nephi 1 and 3, where Nephi says, "And I know that the record which I make is true," and there is a discussion on the changes between to be true and knowing and know, and so on and so forth. So they're actually just real minor changes, nothing real major in that respect. And then he goes through other Book of Mormon scriptures that have that. And he summarizes the original text in 1 Nephi 1 and 3. This is on page 55 of Skousen's Part 1 variants. He says, "It probably read according to the earliest textual sources. I know that the record which I make to be true," is how he says it, because a similar yet even more awkward construction originally occurred in Moroni 4 and 1, where he says, "We know that the manner to be true." And if 1 Nephi 1:3 is to be revised, the word that in that should be deleted in order to agree with the usage in 3 Nephi 5:18. "I know the record which I make to be a just and a true record." Now, there's kind of stylistic differences and changes in that. And then in verse 4, where he says, "For it came to pass in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah," the change that occurred, instead of being Oliver Cowdery editing it, the change is the original manuscript, while not extant here, it was changed in the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah, and Cowdery corrected the manuscript by supralinearly inserting the first year of the reign of Zedekiah. And there's no change in the level of ink flow and so on. So his recommendation is to accept the supralinear insertion first year of in the manuscript. So, you have little stylistic differences and things like that, but it's very important when it comes to some of the major changes. And there's not a whole lot of them, but there are a few. So that's Skousen's work. I would be remiss if I didn't explore. I've been reading today, studying Brant Gardner's 1 Nephi, his commentary on 1 Nephi. And Brant is a fun scholar to read. He is really good. If you can get these commentaries, I strongly recommend you do so. They really are fabulous, up-to-date information on the Book of Mormon. On 1 Nephi 1 and 1, I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, taught by my father, and so on and so forth. The cultural principle involved here is Nephi, and this is on page 59 of Gardner's in his first volume. This is the second witness. Nephi's parents were reared in the old world culture. We know that. They were steeped in its understanding. So his early education and the formation of his character also took place in the old world. And this would influence the Book of Mormon record without question. Well, the peoples of ancient Mediterranean cultures, how they viewed themselves was differently than how modern Europeans and Americans think. Perhaps the most important being the lack of strong individuation. What they had was a group cohesion assumption built in the Mediterranean world in the ancient times. Now this is interesting because we like to think of the individual heroes. You think of Joseph Campbell's magnificent book, The Hero Journey, and so on and so forth. Well, Bruce J. Molina, he's a professor of theology at Creighton University, and Jerome H. Neri, the professor of New Testament studies at Notre Dame, describe what they call the collectivist personality of ancient Mediterranean peoples. Now this is interesting in relation to Lehi's family and how everyone interacts with each other. This is so interesting. This is the Mediterranean collectivist personality. Thanks to their in-group enculturation, they were used to assessing themselves and others in terms of stereotypes often explained as deriving from family history and the geographical location of their group. Furthermore, because these persons were strongly embedded in groups, their behavior was controlled by strong social inhibitions, along with a general lack of personal inhibition. Their prevailing social institution was kinship. Now remember when the sons went back for Ishmael. Now, Nibley, decades ago, indicated that Lehi and Ishmael were related. So see, they're not leaving any of their kin behind if they can allow help it once they depart into the wilderness. Lehi gathers his family and takes off into the wilderness. Then he sends his kids back to pick up Ishmael and his family, and they all go as a group. It's very interesting. The familism, belief in the central role and value of the household. In Lehi's way, it was the tent. And Nibley talks about that. The sheiks of the Arabian desert, the center of the political, social, family institution, the cultural learning, and the political power came from the tent of the sheik. This is beautiful Arabian desert imagery here. Well, the value of the household, this is what was foremost in the people's minds. So as they stress, a person was defined by his family. And when Nephi says he was born of goodly parents, he was defining himself. Now, Melina and Neri remind us, if the ancestors were distinguished in virtue, which they were, my father having been born of goodly parents, they should be expected to breed virtue. And we see Lehi constantly trying to do this with his discourses to his sons when they reach the valley of Lemuel and they discuss the river of Lemuel, and Lehi trying to constantly admonish his sons. Even his dreams reflect this idea of trying to breed virtue with his children. And Nephi, of course, takes hold, and he never lets go. I mean, he's almost like a self-righteous guy in a way. He's almost otherworldly in his ability to hold on to virtue. Well, Plato stated it clearly. They were good because they sprang from good fathers. I like that. It's on page 59 of Brandt's commentary. Now, the other thing that I really liked about Brandt, he really explores a good deal of depth about the language issue, and he brings up the LDS scholarship up to date. I've touched a little bit here and there in my videos already. Listen to how Gardner postulates some of the situations and issues. And this is going to take a little bit of doing because he really goes into some wonderful detail on this theme. It is a critical theme with the Book of Mormon record keepers themselves. So it doesn't surprise me that Gardner, being the meticulous scholar that he is, really gives us some wonderful thinking here. And it's so good I'm going to read this extensively. Pages 61 and following. Yea, I make a record in the language of my father, which consists of the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. And I know that the record which I make is true, and I make it with my own hand, and I make it according to my own knowledge. That's Nephi's approach. Well, the problem of language in the Book of Mormon begins in the second verse of the text. This is an interesting situation we find here. Nephi states that the record is in the language of his father, and this has two elements: the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. So we're naturally very interested in what the original language of the plates might have been. Of course. The text, though, is too cryptic to allow the confirmation of any hypothesis. When we look at the historical and the archaeological research in recent years, it's confirmed that the Egyptian script had a strong presence in Israel during Lehi's time, and this is what I was indicating in some earlier videos. John S. Thompson, a PhD student of Egyptology at the University of Pennsylvania, has an interesting suggestion. Egyptian, or Egyptian-trained scribes, cut off from their homeland, well acquainted with Egyptian decorum as well as with the Canaanite language, educated local scribes who in their turn passed on their knowledge to their successors. Such a view, bolstered by the Egyptian title scribe appearing in hieratic on an artifact from Lachish, suggests that the possibility was that by Lehi's day, scribes had a knowledge of Egyptian that had existed in the area for quite some time, and they had maintained a scribal tradition of writing that Egyptian.